We're up here on top of Mount Marcy, just waiting for the sun to rise. Day 2 of the Northville-Placid Trail is in the books. Well, life doesn't get much better than this open ridge walk on Jay Mountain, and we're at the summit of Lower Wolfjaw, our 8th high peak of the day here on the Great Range Traverse. Well, it's 4:30 a.m., heading a big slide today, and it's -4 degrees here at the parking lot. Bushwhacking our way up Green Mountain, and I have to say, the trees are winning this fight today. Well, the sun is shining and the wind is whipping here up on Haystack. Next stop, Saddleback Cliffs. Cock-a-doodle-doo from the summit of Rooster Comb. Scarface might be the most underrated hike in the entire park. 60-mile-an-hour winds up on Hurricane. Very fitting, cruising up the Bald Rock slab here on Bald Mountain. Standing up here on the summit of Catamount Mountain, Iroquois, Mount Van Hovenberg, Skylight, Santanoni. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. Hello out there, and welcome to a special and straight-to-the-point episode here on the 46 of 46 podcast. Anybody who has listened to my podcast for long enough knows my love for the Adirondack Park runs deep, and I am fortunate enough to call it home. And because of that, I always try bringing the ADK to listeners' ears via the podcast. My desire is for this show to give you a taste of the Adirondacks when you can't be here yourself. This week will be a bit of a different episode than I've ever put out. It's not going to be a trail episode where I narrate my adventure out in the backcountry and tell you about the trails, the rivers, the summits, and the snacks. Nor is it going to be a summit session where I discuss all things ADK with a guest. It's also not going to be a spooky ADK campfire story, although October is coming, so sit tight on that. Speaking of a campfire, let's set the mood for this episode. There we go. Nothing like sitting around the campfire to have a little chat about camping. So now this week, I'm going to dive in solo and get straight to the point to inform all of you once and for all what the rules and regulations are here in the Adirondacks regarding hiking, camping, and campfires. It's rather unfortunate how often things like illegal camping and campfires happen around here, or in the outdoors in general, really. And I feel it's because those rules and regulations aren't visible enough for outdoor recreationists coming to explore the wonders of the ADK, and especially first-timers. Despite what others may think or various social media pages may suggest, I am a believer that people who break these rules aren't doing it maliciously, rather just out of pure ignorance. And that's not a bad thing, they just don't know yet. And as they come to the Adirondacks looking to experience that Hollywood version of the great outdoors, they make a few mistakes. The issue, however, is that while dropping a piece of trash accidentally on the trail won't necessarily have big negative ramifications, an illegal campfire, however, could legitimately burn down the park. So my hopes is this episode will either confirm what you already know regarding these topics or inform you for the first time, thus allowing you to understand and even politely educate others who aren't as informed as you, as well as creating more stewards of the Adirondack Park. First, we will begin with camping. Allow me to paint you a picture. You and your buddies are coming up for a weekend in the wilderness, hiking mountains, camping in the woods, having a great time in the great outdoors. Rivers, lakes, streams, mountains, trees, fresh air, wildlife. You didn't, however, really look at the map and figured you'd just kind of wing it once you got to this 6 million acre forest preserve. A park that experiences lost and even dead hikers regularly because these mountains can swallow you up if you don't prepare. So since you and your group don't quite know where you're going to camp that night, you hike along the Great Range and figure you'll eventually come across a campsite, or you'll just camp along the side of the hiking trail, or maybe at a lake somewhere. Now, as many of you listening who do know the rules, you're probably shaking your head now and rolling your eyes at that thought. And those who might not know the rules are probably thinking, yeah, that sounds like a good time. What's wrong with that scenario? So allow me to start by saying the Leave No Trace principle number 1 says to plan and prepare before your adventure. So it would have been a better situation to have studied the map and the route you and your buddies are planning to take, rather than just winging it in an unfamiliar land and, knowing where to expect the campsites to be located, and if there aren't campsites, where you even can legally camp, because camping along the side of the trail or next to a lake or stream is actually illegal. So here are some pertinent rules and regulations regarding camping in the Adirondacks that will help keep the land wild and pristine, and also keep you from getting a ticket from our superhero ADK Forest Rangers. Big shout out to the Rangers here in the Adirondacks. Thanks for doing what you do. But let's get into it. Camping rules and regulations. Camping is prohibited within 150 feet of any road, trail, spring, stream, pond, or other body of water, except at areas designated by a Camp Here disc. So if not a designated campsite and you're planning to just kind of primitive camp, you must go at least 150 feet off trail into the woods. And if you're doing that, remember leave no trace principle number 2, to travel and camp on durable surfaces. Next, camping in the high peaks eastern and central zones is limited to only designated campsites. And you can see the map to view where those zones are. But again, camping in the high peaks in the eastern and central zone is limited to only designated campsites. So no primitive camping. It's very important to keep in mind if you're in the high peaks. And of course, there's a lot more to the Adirondacks than just the High Peaks Wilderness, but it's important to know. Except during an emergency, camping is prohibited above an elevation of 4,000 feet in the Adirondack Park. So definitely no camping on any of these summits. And camping above 3,500 feet actually is prohibited in the high peaks, except for designated campsites, and there's only 3 of them. The Snowbird site, between Haystack and Basin, sitting just around that 4,000 feet elevation, the Lake Arnold campsite, and the Mary Louise Pond in the Giant Mountain Wilderness campsite are the only designated sites between those elevations. So more or less, there's no camping above 3,500 feet, except at one of those 3 campsites. All right, you're going to go camping with a bunch of people, groups of 10 or more campers, or stays of more than 3 days in one place requires a permit from the DEC Forest Ranger responsible for the area. And if that's you and you need to get a permit, you can call 518-897-1300 to get the name and contact information for the local ranger of that wilderness. Now let's talk about lean-tos, or shelters some people call them. Lean-tos are highly popular in the ADK, and there's literally hundreds of them all around the park. There's around 250 of them to be exact. So if you're like me and you prefer a lean-to over tent, you'll want to listen up. Lean-tos are typically marked on the High Peaks map, and they're available in many areas on a first-come, first-served basis. Lean-tos cannot be used exclusively and must be shared with other campers. They are thought to hold up to 8 campers, so if you snag a lean-to and some other hikers wander over in the middle of the night, move over. It's time to share that wooden floor of the 3-sided structure with complete strangers. Strangers who probably smell just as bad as you do, too. And they're probably soaking wet, I would imagine. Aren't lean-tos just great? I feel they're an Adirondack staple. But I will note, however, while it is proper etiquette to share your tent site or the lean-to for a night if a second camper or a group of campers arrives after dark, especially when it's raining, cold, and windy, but in the morning, that second group that arrived after dark should pack up and leave to find another location. And that's not always possible, especially on busy weekends, but that's kind of the unwritten rules in the hiking and camping etiquette. So if someone's already there and you show up but you need to stay there, you can stay there, but proper etiquette is move somewhere else in the morning. It should go without saying, but you'd be surprised how often I've seen this, but campers are prohibited from setting up a tent inside a lean-to, regardless of how brutal the bugs may be. And tents, however, need to be set up at least 150 feet from the lean-to, which is one thing I'm honestly not quite sure about. I don't know why that 150 feet rule for the tent exists, but that's what the DEC has come up with, so that's the rule. Many lean-to sites do have tent sites at them as well. Other things to keep in mind as well include pit privies, aka outhouses. They're often provided near popular camping areas and campsites and even some trailheads. And if none are available, however, dispose of human waste by digging a cat hole 6 to 8 inches deep to do your business in. And then make sure it's at least 150 feet from water or campsites. And upon completing your business, cover that with leaves and soil. And once again, there's another pesky leave no trace principle, number 3, coming into play: dispose of waste properly. Although actually leave no trace suggests 200 feet, but the state of New York has deemed 150 feet an appropriate length. So do with that what you will. And speaking of 150 feet, on top of not going number 1 or number 2 within 150 feet of water, remember, do not use soap to wash yourself, your clothes, or your dishes within 150 feet of water. The soap could run into the water, and as we all know, those backcountry ponds and lakes and rivers and streams, those are no places for your soap to run into. Now, speaking of dishes and food, let's talk cooking and food storage. It's recommended to never cook or eat within 150 feet of your campsite, but because I'm a straight shooter, I'm just going to say I find this idea makes sense on paper, but it's a bit impractical. Yeah, sure, it makes perfect sense. That's why it's recommended. It keeps the scents and the aroma of your food away from where you're going to sleep. But realistically, more often than not, a camper is just going to sit in their lean-to or at their campsite to eat their food. So again, take that for what you will, but the recommendation is to never eat or cook within 150 feet of your campsite. But I understand that doesn't really make sense in real life as much as it does on paper. Why, you ask? Animals. So let's talk bears. Black bears are present throughout the Adirondacks, and those skittish animals who will typically avoid humans at all costs, they're around, and if you actually come across one, consider yourself lucky. Campers must store all food, garbage, and toiletries in a bear-resistant canister or a food hang. And bear-resistant canisters, however, are required in the eastern and central High Peaks wilderness zones. So again, that's pretty much all of the high peaks except for the Santanoni Range and the Sewards. In other places outside those zones, a bear bag will suffice, but just make sure you hang it at least 10 feet high and on a branch at least 10 feet out from the tree. And even occasionally there's going to be rangers set up at popular trailheads on busy weekends, making sure everybody camping does indeed have a bear canister, since it is now the law. And many of you may remember last summer, 2020, how the DEC had to put down a, quote, nuisance black bear around Lake Colden who was getting too aggressive with campers who didn't store their food properly. Absolutely terrible situation. It's always terrible when a black bear who, is in its natural habitat doing what it does, just doing bear stuff, is ultimately taken out because of foolish human interaction. But you know what they say, a fed bear is a dead bear, so bring those bear cans and be mindful of your food storage. If you've never used a bear canister, it's quite simple. You put all your food into it and then set it on the ground in the brush about 150 feet from your campsite at night. Now, one thing to note, I know the zoning is changing and that will soon be called the High Peaks Wilderness Complex or something along those lines, but upon the time of recording this episode, those changes have not officially taken place yet. The same rules will still apply to the same areas, so it's really not that crucial, but just to be aware that the eastern High Peaks, the central High Peaks, and the western High Peaks may end up having a different name, but the same rules apply for the same places. And I saved the best and most important topic for last: campfires. Nobody loves a good campfire more than I do. Gathering good dry sticks and broken branches, a little old man's beard for some flames, some twigs, and building the most perfect campfire to relax around, enjoy the heat, the smell, the sound, and help keep those pesky bugs at bay. I'm more of a log cabin campfire builder, though I do tend to do the TP version occasionally, but typically when building it from scratch, I go log cabin. But the fact of the matter is these rules and regulations regarding campfires are put in place for a reason. That reason is to protect the Adirondacks, the land, the animals, the ecosystem, all of it. And protecting that land from potential catastrophic destruction is far more important than any of our outdoor recreational enjoyments